Hi, everyone. It is another Friday, which means we are back with another Ask Me Anything session here at Experience Investigators. I'm Jeannie Walters, founder and CEO, and I'm really excited to talk through what we can do beyond just looking to the past in customer experience. How can we really apply what we learn and innovate on behalf of our customers? So, this is all about ideas to help you design your customer experience future. As always, we welcome your questions. We welcome your commentary, your insights. This community is full of smart people from all over the world. And so we're also interested in that. Where are you joining us from? Let us know as you join us today. As always, I'm joined by David Hornreich, our Director of Marketing. David, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Jeannie, flattery will get you nowhere. Uh, although the people who do join us are very smart, so
They
that is
are indeed. They are. Yeah, that's not even flattery. It's just the truth.
it's just the truth. It's
It
true.
is. So, how is it in Seattle today?
Winter is trying to hold on as long as it possibly can. It's cold and rainy.
Mm,
Yeah, but
no
one
good.
day it will be sunny in Seattle, and that will be a glorious day.
Well, we've had a lot of gray days in Chicago lately too, and today is no exception. It's been raining all day. So we are enjoying similar weather here today.
Yeah, and I want to say hi to Tatiana, who's joining us from San Francisco,
Oh,
where it's probably a little less gray, but and again, it's the morning, so maybe the fog is
that's
still in.
true.
Let us
We
know.
Well, we love hearing where people are joining us from,
Mhm.
and I think this is a fun topic. So I'm really curious what people can bring to this discussion. And innovation in general is pretty fascinating. So why don't we get into it?
Let's do it.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, my name is Jeannie Walters. And for those of you who don't know me, I am founder and CEO of Experience Investigators, where the mission of our company is to create fewer ruined days for customers. We do that through workshops, through training, through executive coaching, as well as keynotes and working with different clients on content and things like that. So, our goal is to empower and educate all of you out there who are leaders in this space. Whether or not you have customer experience in your title, we know that if you're attending today, it's because you care and you are passionate about creating a customer centric organization. So, welcome, and we love seeing you here. So, today we're going to talk about something that I think we often ignore in customer experience, frankly. We don't always talk about how can we use all of these insights that we gather, all of this feedback that we get, all of this data that we collect. How can we use all of those things that we apply in best practices in customer experience programs to really look to the future? And instead of just thinking about this as, okay, we need to make an improvement here and an improvement here, I want to offer a few ideas for how you can think bigger about this, how you can really leverage customer experience to not only innovate on behalf of your customers, but to stay ahead of your competition, to make sure that within your industry, you are leading when it comes to experience. So, yes, innovation can absolutely be about those small improvements, but it can also be about a better overall customer journey end to end that elevates not just the customer experience for your customers, but also delivers better results for your organization. So we refer to this specific kind of lens, this view on how to innovate as experiential innovation. And I get so excited about this topic because I think it's so cool to think like this. Think about what if? What if we could think beyond the restrictions of today? What if we could think big about what we can deliver? It's a really fun way to kind of shake off the cobwebs sometimes because I hear from a lot of you that, customer experience work, it's kind of, there's a lot of effort, right? And sometimes it can be a little thankless. It can be all about collecting and providing those insights, but not seeing real action around it. This is one really creative way to take action on all of those insights that you gather. So, we're going to talk about three specific approaches that you can use for experiential innovation. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? We have lots of different ways that we can apply what we learn and that lens about being customer first to how we innovate on behalf of our customers. So the first thing we'll talk about is future state customer journey mapping. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. The next thing we'll talk about is micromapping. If you've been here for a while, you've heard me use that phrase. We're going to use it specifically around innovation. And then also talk about service blueprinting and how important that is when we're talking about a future way to deliver customer experiences. So let's get started. So when we jump into thinking through how can we deliver a different type of experience for our clients, future state journey mapping is a great place to start. Now, I've seen this approached a couple of different ways. A lot of times when we approach a journey mapping project, we actually start with current state, which is what we recommend. We want to understand what is the current journey that your customers experience so that you can really find those challenges and opportunities to improve. Sometimes you can do that almost in real time and improve the journey for your customers. So, understanding current state is absolutely important to make any improvements. However, then you can apply this lens of the future state of customer experience. So, when you think about the journey of the future, what does that look like? And really getting into the same mindset that you use when you're applying the current state. So, thinking about from the customer's perspective, what are they experiencing as they walk through this new journey? How can we update and be more proactive and positive for them based on some of those challenges that we've uncovered, based on some of those opportunities that we've uncovered? But sometimes you can also apply a lens of what I call the magic wand. What if you had a magic wand and you could just create a whole new customer journey? What if you didn't have the restrictions of the systems that you have? What if you could say, what if budget and time and technology, what if none of that mattered? What would this journey look like? Now, sometimes I get pushback on this because it's a little bit of wishful thinking, but that's okay because that's where we actually understand and apply some of the magic moments that we can do. So, for example, if you are thinking about your current journey right now and you've identified that one of the things that is a challenge is the payment process, and you kind of think, wow, the payment process stinks. We should really provide more communication around it. We can't change the systems. We can't change the way it works. We're just going to think about how we communicate about it. Every once in a while, when you have one of those situations, challenge yourself and think, what if? What if we could change it? What would the customer actually want? I mean, look at what Amazon did with removing cashiers, with removing everything in their Amazon Go stores. That was because they thought, what if the customer could just walk in, grab something, and leave? What if we could provide that experience? So when you identify things like that in that really kind of open-ended way, you sometimes will uncover things where you think, well, what if we could do that? Maybe we can. Maybe not in 6 months, maybe in a year, maybe in 3 years, but it gives you a vision for where you go that's really focused on the customer. And the other thing I like about this is that somewhere in your industry right now, there are people trying to disrupt your industry, and they are disrupting it based on the experience. They might be selling the same products, they might be providing the same services, but instead of thinking, well, this is the way it's always done in our industry, they're thinking differently about it. This is where you can be your own disruptor. I actually encourage customer experience teams to have what I call disruption days, which is where you literally think, if we were disrupting our industry, what would this journey look like? It opens up your mind. It provides those ideas that you can turn into, okay, maybe we can't do that tomorrow, but what can we do to get closer? It's a very powerful way to make sure that you're not stagnating in the industry and that you're not getting complacent about the journey that you do provide for your customers. Because guess what? Your competitors, and even the competitors you've never heard of yet, they are not complacent about this. They are exploring this right now. So take advantage of this opportunity to use journey mapping and the techniques around it to really think big. And then we also want to talk about micromapping because sometimes when we talk about these big journeys, people get very overwhelmed and they say, hey, I don't really want to think big about all of this because we know we can't tackle all of this and we know we don't have the resources and it's going to be a waste of time. Fair enough. This is where you dig in. This is where you think about actually that Amazon example is another good one where they thought about that one moment in the customer journey, right? What can we do to make sure that we are providing a more proactive, future focused experience in that one journey? I'll give you another example here to look at. Any of you who have onboarding for your clients, maybe you're in B2B and it's a really long, arduous onboarding process. How much of that feels antiquated? How much of that feels like, well, that's just the way we do it? As a supplier myself to big organizations, I'll tell you some of them feel like they have not been updated. Those moments along the journey have not been updated since the 90s. They send me things in email as attachments that I have to fill out by hand and then scan it or take a picture and send it back. And then they sign that copy and send it back. And it feels like, wow, this is obviously something that's been overlooked for years. Now, if you look at any part of your journey and you think, oh, that just feels old, micromapping is a great place to look at that. The idea of micromapping is looking into the details of one part of the journey. And so it's really about drilling down from the customer's perspective or the supplier or your partner or whoever, and really looking at, okay, what are the steps that they have to go through and how can we make this feel more modern, be, more seamless, less friction, all of those things. How can we leverage the technology and the expectations that everybody has now? For instance, as Generation Z enters the marketplace, they are expecting to do almost everything on their phones. If that is not available right now today, it's time to start thinking about that. So, all of those moments along the journey, we can dig in with micromapping and again, think big about what we can do because that will lead to something closer to meeting those expectations than maybe what you have today. So, this is where you want to focus on a specific challenge and innovate specifically around that. And then none of this matters if we can't figure out how do we deliver it. And that's what's so powerful about service blueprinting. Let's say you start with that future state journey map and you identify a few places that you know you can change for the better. You are thinking big, you're going to innovate, you're going to disrupt, all of those things. And you know what it's supposed to look like for the customer. But if you don't really think through what are the systems that we need, what are the processes that we need to train to and communicate about, what are the different ways that our technology and our tools have to be incorporated here? So, service blueprinting is the idea that there's front stage, which is what happens with the customer, and then backstage, which is what happens to deliver that to the customer. We actually have right on time. We have a customer service blueprinting course on LinkedIn Learning. I encourage you to check that out. It's under an hour. It's really easy to take in, but it goes through all of those steps so that you can really understand how powerful this technique is. If we don't think about this, then we skip steps. An example you may have heard me use before is a big box store that you've heard of actually rolled out what they thought was a very customer centric way where people could pay on the app. The problem was people got to the store, customers got to the store when they were piloting this, filled their carts, paid on the app, and then walked through the cashier line. And the cashiers had no idea that this was happening. So they had no idea. How do I check if they've actually paid? How do they, what do I say to them? Do they need a receipt? All of these questions they had not thought through because they were so focused on the customer side that they hadn't really approached it from what do we need to do inside the organization and include all the right people. Service blueprinting helps you think through all of those steps on the inside of the organization so you're prepared to deliver to the customers throughout that customer journey as well. It's a great way to include many different teams in innovation as well. So if you want to start somewhere, you can start with that micromapping and figure out what would we do for a customer and then apply service blueprinting techniques, get other people involved, and you'll get a lot more buy-in when you need it to actually invest in those innovations that you need to make. So these are 3 ideas for you to take away, but there are other ideas as well. There are customer rooms, there is customer journey storyboarding, there are all these different techniques. And so when we talk about innovation, really the most important thing, and this comes back to what I say about customer experience all the time, right? It's a mindset, it's a strategy, and it's a discipline. When it comes to innovation, what I see a lot of is big thinking with not enough action. And so when we're talking about experiential innovation, we're talking about those same 3 things. It needs to be a mindset. We need to keep our radar up. We need to be aware of the changing expectations of our customers. And we need to be sure that we're not getting complacent. We are not deciding that just because we're ahead now, we'll always be ahead with the same way of doing things. It has to be a strategy. We have to think about what will the return be? What will happen if we don't innovate? What happens if we don't invest in this? And then 3 years later, we're delivering the exact same customer journey. We're not going to be able to keep up in the marketplace. And then there's this discipline to it. We need to make sure we're applying the right techniques so that we can take real action that delivers real results. So if you're just thinking big, then that's not enough. We have to drill that down. We have to make sure we understand what will it take to deliver that. But if we're just thinking about the delivery of today, of the restrictions we have today, then we're going to miss that opportunity to think big and to think about the many, many ways that we can innovate on behalf of our customers. So, really, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many ways to do this. And I think a lot of you probably are in situations where a lot of your time is taken up by looking to the past, by looking at data that's delivered, by sharing that data. But all of that is about what's happened. And so every once in a while, it is great to exercise that other part of our brain to think bigger, to look beyond and think about what do we want for our customers in 5 years? What if we did have flying cars? What if we did have this future that we've seen in all these sci-fi movies? What would that be for our customers? We're getting there, aren't we? With robotics and AI and machine learning. What if we could really ramp that up? So, thinking big is a huge part of this, but we also want to make sure that we are being, thoughtful about the discipline of this as well. And I think once we put all of these tools together, that's where you see really exciting disruption that is for the benefit of customers. You look at the disruptors of the last decade plus, and pretty much all of them have been around experience. This is where we can make a difference as customer experience leaders on behalf of our customers and our organization for a long, long time to come. So I'm curious, what are you all doing for innovation in your organization? What questions do you have? Have you tried any of these techniques? Join the conversation.
Yeah, and I want to start off by highlighting a couple comments that folks have added. On the topic of thinking big, Justin says, agreed, love dreaming big about customer experience. Luciana says, wishful thinking is a great step for creating future
Mhm,
strategies.
mhm.
Absolutely.
And
Um,
hello to Justin and Luciana.
yeah,
Justin, I'm not sure you joined us here before, but Justin does a lot of great work in our CX space as well. So great to see you here.
very cool. Debbie, great to see you again.
Yes.
Referring to that gap that you mentioned, says that there must be an alignment between CX innovation and business
Yep.
operations.
Yep.
So true.
Yep.
And Christopher, back with another
Here we go. This is what we love about
another note that
Christopher.
makes
He
us sit
he
up.
has stuff to say, which we have to think about.
Yeah. But he says, great topic. Often the way CX programs are set up means organizations spend their time fixing CX with improvements to get them from behind the curve to
Mhm,
on the curve. But there's so much to offer if you create a space to experiment with getting ahead of the curve with better experiences through innovative improvements.
mhm.
And that's so in line with what you talk about, Jeannie, about being proactive instead of reactive.
Yep.
So right on.
Yeah, and you know what that reminds me of? And this would be really cool to think about, but, a lot of organizations now, and even, like, my kids' high school now have a maker space, and essentially what that is just kind of a room with a bunch of tools and materials and, computers and things and saying, "Hey, go for it. Like, whatever you wanna make." And I think that's really what I find so compelling about this is when you really kind of break off the handcuffs of current day thinking, meaning if, oh gosh, we know our data isn't in the right place. We know that we don't have the people right now. We don't have the technology to support this. When you let yourself let go of all of that, you start thinking differently. And if you let yourself kind of map it out, then you start seeing real innovations that can happen. And that's what's so exciting about it. And so when we talk about, for instance, customer rooms, if we think about that almost as a maker space for the future customer journey, that puts a whole new spin on it and something that you can invite other people in, you can get different perspectives, and I think you'd be amazed at what you can all come up with.
Yeah, I love that comparison. Miriam says hi. Justin
Hello?
says hey.
Hey, Justin.
And Alex on LinkedIn says that they're just going through an innovation challenge in their company and using a business canvas to cover all that's needed to achieve their challenge. That's
That
an innovation challenge sounds like a really good initiative.
Yeah, for sure, for sure, and, again, we can apply, like, there are hackathons, right? Like,
Mhm.
when they get all the programmers together for 48 hours or whatever and say, this is the goal, just see what you can come up with. And I think that in CX, what I've seen over the last 20 years is it started as kind of a creative endeavor and it moved squarely into the science world of metrics and numbers and spreadsheets. And both of those are incredibly important to successful customer experience. But I think we sometimes in some organizations, I mean, we work with different organizations that are full of engineers and folks like that, and they love numbers, and that's so important. But helping your leaders understand the power of really innovating in these ways. I love the idea of a challenge that could be really powerful. I also love the idea of just letting things flow in a way that you invite other people throughout the process so that everybody knows they're included in this, because that's where you see the importance of representation as well. I mean, when we innovate, we have to make sure that we're not just innovating what we think. We have to include people who represent our customers, who really understand who they are and the different situations that they're in. And I've mentioned this before, but one of my favorite examples of this was an organization that brought in customers with disabilities specifically to a designated place in their headquarters where they had all their gadgets and stuff, and they would make special adaptations and then invite customers in to help them innovate around those adaptations so that people could use their products better. What a great way to innovate, right? Including our customers in this as well. So there's so much to unpack here. But if you haven't started, just thinking about this can be really, really exciting.
Love it. And Luciana jumped in with a comment that she thinks the big challenge on innovation is allowing ourselves to take the time to do it since
Mhm.
it's not directly impacting short-term KPIs. And that's
Yep.
something that we've seen a lot of, where it's just making the time
Mhm.
to actually dedicate to this and knowing that in the long term, it's a win.
Right, right, and sometimes you can play around a little bit with prediction, and, I mean, look in your industry at the people who maybe or the people that the organizations that aren't keeping up. Where did they miss the mark? Where did they not innovate? There is risk with when you don't look to the future, because then you basically are waiting for somebody else to take the lead. And so if it's important for your organization to take the lead in whatever way that's defined, then make sure that CX innovation is absolutely part of that. That's the only way you can do it, because otherwise somebody else, usually it's somebody in the industry, sometimes it's completely outside and it's a disruptor. When you be your own disruptor, you actually see ways to lead in the future, gain market share, exceed customer expectations, all the things we talk about that are true return on investment of customer experience efforts can be applied here. We just have to think about it a little bit differently and make sure that we are um, looking at the risk, not just the reward.
And Jeannie, one of the things that you mentioned was involving customers and not making assumptions about what people want. And
Mhm.
Christopher jumping on that comment as well, saying running future projection sessions with customers on
Mhm.
where current trends will take them and how they will change to adapt allows the company to see how relevant their experiences will be, which is great because even if your experiences are relevant today,
Right.
as you said multiple times, someone is actively working to disrupt that. And
Mhm.
will it be you
Right.
or will
Right.
you be reacting to it?
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and, I mean, that's one of my favorite things to do, is to innovate with customers because you'll hear things that, I call it the V8 moments, which shows how old I am because those commercials aren't even on anymore, but they used to, hit themselves and say, "I could have had a V8." And that's you can see that happen in those innovation sessions because customers will all say the same thing, and you can see people from the organization in the back of the room going, "Why didn't we think of that? Like, that's so obvious," right? And yet it's an innovation. It's something that maybe not anybody is doing in your industry. So being open to what those customers are offering can be really powerful as well. And just making sure that we are thinking about not just, the big innovations, but also those moments along the journey, excuse me, that are challenging, and we just kind of shrug and we say, "Well, that's how everybody does it in our industry." That's a perfect opportunity to innovate. Perfect opportunity to innovate. So, really think about this in a different way, keep that radar up, and, make sure that as you're talking through these innovations, you're not only including your customers, but you're including other leaders throughout your organization because we need that buy-in. We need those coalitions in order to deliver on this. And so that's why doing something like a service blueprinting session can be a really powerful way to get other leaders involved and help them feel like they are part of this. I don't think there's anybody out there who doesn't really like being part of innovation, being part of thinking about the future. And so really applying that and inviting people into that process, both customers and inside the organization, you can get a lot of momentum around this moving forward.
So we've got a question from Salim. What about areas and countries in which customer experience is not given priority? How can we craft CX in a way that benefits customers or our organizations if it's
Mhm.
just not a priority?
Yeah, well, you're not alone. Often customer experience is seen as something that is kind of nice to have, but not necessarily part of how you do business. And honestly, that's a big part of what we're trying to change, right? Customer experience when done well, literally, thank you, uh, returns on investment throughout the organization. So you get, higher customer lifetime value, more retention, more renewal, more average spend per customer. All of those things happen. As well as inside the organization, it makes hiring easier. It provides a better employee experience. If you are investing in customer experience, you better be investing in the employee experience as well as making sure that, you're getting more word of mouth referrals both from employees and customers. So we actually have a blog post about this. I don't know if we can pull it up that easily, but about all the different ways that it provides return on investment, the real value of customer experience and how to present that. But beyond that, I think when we talk about customer experience, we have to make sure that we understand we have a customer experience. Our customers are experiencing the CX of our company, whether or not we're intentional about it. And so, what that says is that, yes, you have a customer experience today. If it's a poor customer experience, if it's not meeting those expectations, you are actively losing customers. You are actively leaving money on the table because they're not spending as much with you. You are essentially losing by not investing in it. So, when we talk about customer experience within our organizations, when we're trying to get our leaders on board, we have to paint the picture of intentional customer experience. But to do that well, we need to make sure we know what our North Star is, what promises have we made, as well as what is the goal here for the organization. Too often the goal is way too vague. And they say, well, we just want a better customer experience. And then they scratch their head in a year and say, well, I guess that didn't work because they didn't even know what they were measuring. They didn't even know what success looked like. Now, when we talk about success for customer experience, we have to define that. And we have the two tools, you've heard me mention them before, the mission statement and the success statement. If you get those foundational pieces right, and there you go, we've got workbooks for you, uh, then that makes everything else easier. And you can include your leaders in helping you define that success statement because the success statement is actually based on your organizational vision and values along with your CX mission, but it's also about your organizational goals and what's important to your leaders and how will you measure that? Because if customer experience is done well, every single part of the organization wins, which means every single leader wins. It makes everybody's job easier, but we need to get them on board in order to deliver on the promises that we make. So I encourage you to look at those two things and really think about what is the return on the investment and start speaking that language because your CEO, your chief operating officer, your chief financial officer, they do not want to hear about why it's important morally to deliver on, a customer experience. They don't want to hear that customers will like us more. That is not meaningful to their goals for, what they've been tasked to do for the organization. So we need to speak their language and make sure we are showing up as business people, as business leaders, and not just showing up as cheerleaders or advocates for our customers, but showing up as that, as well as organizational leaders and painting the benefits to the organization. So we really have to work on that. And that's why I like to say it's a mindset, it's a strategy, and it's a discipline. The strategy part, that's where you're defining what is it that we're trying to do for our organization. And then the discipline of that is saying this is how we will get there. And that's where you define things like your CX charter and you get the team together and you figure out really the governance of managing all of these different priorities in the right way so that you get to those results for the organization. That was really long. I'm sorry. I like that topic.
Yeah. Yeah, that was exciting. I like when you get, like, very impassioned about what you're talking about. We've got a great comment from Adele here. Whenever you modify or innovate to solve for a friction point for the customer, you're also relieving your team from dealing with the
Mhm,
same problems every day, and those problems can be soul crushing.
mhm.
Um, we hear a lot about, sometimes we'll get questions, well, what should we focus on first, customer experience or employee experience? And they're really the same thing.
Yeah.
It's incredible how much focusing on the customer can
Mhm.
make life better for everybody who works there too.
Absolutely, and I love that you brought this up, Elaine, because it goes back to our last question as well, which is sometimes when we talk about the value of customer experience, we don't talk about the reduction in expenses, the reduction in employee turnover, which is so important right now in today's labor market. So if you can reduce those service issues, you're going to reduce expenses, but you're also going to help exactly to your point, Elaine, you're going to help those team members be better at their jobs, frankly. They're going to be able to be more efficient and more valuable because they're not dealing with these service issues that show up again and again and again. Nobody likes that. Nobody feels good about that. And the other thing I would encourage you to talk about is, especially in today's market, leaders are very concerned about employee retention and talent acquisition. We want the best and brightest in our organizations and we want them to stay. And that's been really challenging these last few years. So when you talk about, what, poll your people and say, we have this service issue that keeps showing up. This is what our employees have said about it. It takes them away from the valuable work. It makes them feel crummy at the end of the day. It's soul crushing, as you said. All of those kind of tidbits about how they're feeling. Then you ask, would you refer somebody for this role? And it's a little bit of a twist on NPS, but essentially what you're doing is you're saying, how, would you actually recommend that one of your friends work here? And that question can be very, very powerful because you'll see people say, gosh, I love the culture. I love what we're supposed to be doing, but I can't recommend somebody work here right now because it's too much with all this service, with people complaining, with all the work that I have to do just to fix something that should be working. And so if we look at that as a marker, that can help drive our leaders to really care about things more as well. Because if you can reduce those service issues and then ask that question again, you'll often hear people change their mind and say, yes, now I can. Now I can see that we're investing in the right things. We're taking care of problems as they come up. We're, making sure they don't stay forever. We're getting fewer complaints. All of those things really, really matter. So that is a tool in our toolkit as well right now, is to talk about the value of employee experience and the value of employees who are dedicated to the customer experience mission and helping us deliver on that. And so putting that all together, that's what starts getting our leaders on board and understanding just how valuable it is to invest in customer experience.
Thanks, Adele. That's a great comment. So Christopher has a question that might make you a little antsy to
Uh-oh.
nervous, or nervous to answer. Which brands do you admire in the space
Mhm.
of experiential
Innovation.
innovation?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And I know some of these are boring, but I'll get to some more exciting ones. I mean, we have to give props to Amazon, right? They're constantly innovating around the customer experience. They're not only innovating, but they're willing to take risks and then say, "Oh, I guess that didn't work as well," and figure something out um, differently for that. So they're constantly innovating around even how they notify you about your orders, things like that. They are really looking at that. So that's one. Back in the day, I would have said Zappos because they were really innovating around different things too, but now they're part of Amazon. So that's all part of the same thing. I actually like what I'm seeing in fintech, actually, because now there's a lot of innovation around how do we make investing more accessible to people? How do we make sure that as we are charging one another for money and different things, how can we make that more accessible and easier? And so if you look back, think about the first time you used Venmo and how easy that was and how different that was, because it was so intuitive and straightforward and all on the phone, right? So there are all these different things going on in that space that I find really, really interesting. And then the other thing I'll do here is give a shout out to some local independent organizations. And what I mean by that is you look back in the last few years and so much innovation happened because it had to, but then they're continuing that on. So, for example, all the different independent bookstores that had to sell without people coming in, what did they do? They did virtual book readings. They did all sorts of things. They started book clubs that they hadn't had before. They invited in different experiences for people so that they could really engage with the content instead of just engaging with the store. So that type of thing can be considered experiential innovation. The other one that I've actually blogged about before is a local toy store here. And a couple of years ago, they realized that a lot of parents were struggling with, because the toy store was just, amazing. And the parents would say, like, okay, I'm going to come back on December 23rd because I don't have anywhere to put this, right? And so we need to make sure it's under the tree, but we can't have any prying eyes find it. So they literally started what they called Santa's Workshop, I think. And parents could say, I'm going to buy this today. I'm going to pay you a little bit of extra to wrap it and keep it. And then I can pick it up on Christmas Eve. How brilliant is that? And so little things like that, it has nothing to do with their products, right? That's experience. That's thinking through what is this customer really going through and how can we make it a little easier for them? How can we become their preferred choice simply by helping them through the journey in a different way? So those two, I think, are really some of my favorite independent local examples. And I'm sure examples like that are happening everywhere. And I'm sure some of you have seen that in your own neighborhoods and towns. When there was this need to innovate, they actually did it. So that's a great source of inspiration, I think, is look around at those independent places that are really delivering for you locally. They usually are investing in the experience that is what is creating that loyalty. So think about that when you're looking at innovation as well.
So you said that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Mhm.
And without going all the way down the rabbit hole, I'm curious, can you talk a little bit more about some of the other experiential innovation activities that are out there? I know in the blog post you mentioned customer rooms.
Mhm.
I don't know what those are, so I'm kind of intrigued to hear about that.
Sure. Yeah, this is something that was pretty big for a while, and I think with the virtual world, it's become a little more challenging. But essentially, if we don't understand our customers' true experience, then it's really easy to kind of look at process maps and even journey maps and feel a little disconnected from it. We go, oh, that looks like it's all working. But then when you actually experience it, it can be different. So, some very innovative organizations started what are referred to as customer rooms usually, where they literally set up a room like a conference room or something, where you walked through and experienced all the different pieces of communication, all the different ways that you could get stuck. Some of these got so far as, if you received, and this is in a healthcare example, but in healthcare, if you're dealing with an insurance issue, you get a lot of communication, right? And so what they did was they actually printed out all the different communications somebody got in a week and just had it on the wall so you could flip through and think about, wow, this is overwhelming. Then they had a phone where you could pick up and go through the whole process of getting transferred and being put on hold and all of those things. Then they had the computer terminal set up where you could try to do it online. So hands on like that can really help. So that can be about the current state, but you can also do this while looking to the future, meaning if you really wanted to update something in an innovative way, you create that prototype and you have people actually walk through that as part of the customer journey. Because sometimes what does happen with innovation is we get very excited about something like our mobile phone and we say to the mobile team, we want a mobile app. It's got to do all these things. And they do a great job with the mobile app, but we haven't actually thought about how does that fit into the bigger journey? How does that actually improve what's happening? And what happens if somebody starts over here on their desktop, jumps into the mobile app, and then picks up the phone? Do we know where they are? So that's where all of these techniques can be used together to make sure that you're really understanding what the experience is like for the customer and what we have to do to deliver it. Because otherwise, it can be very easy for innovation to happen a little bit in a silo based on a product or a channel. And then that is not really considering the customer's true journey. One of my little, pet peeves right now is when people say, "Tell me about the digital customer," because I'm like, "Who is that?" I mean, nobody walks around and thinks, "I'm a digital customer. I'm only doing things digitally." Nobody does that. We have to adapt. We have to do things in the moment. If we're in our car and we think, "Oh man, we've got to change that appointment," we're not going to sit there and pull up the app and do it on the app. We're going to say, to our car, our smart speaker, call that number, talk to somebody, leave a message, whatever it is. So even though we might have preferences as customers, we also have real lives that we have to think of. And that's where understanding the whole journey is so important. And that's why when we think about like a customer room, we want to make sure we're considering it within the context of that. So there are other techniques with this too. I really like storyboarding because that gets into the emotion and the understanding in a different way. I think we have a storyboarding resource, if I'm not mistaken. And then, you can also do some simple things like if you know that, oh, there you go. There's the link. Thank you, David. So there are things that you can do that are much smaller than that. You can, for instance, I mean, anybody who, watched an Oprah show in the 90s knows that vision boards were very big, making sure like cutting out the pictures of what you wanted your life to look like and put it on a vision board. A lot of people still do this, I know. And you can do the same thing for your customer experience. What do we want that to feel like? What do we want it to be like? You can even get to the point where you are showing a picture of exactly what you want. A great example of this is Delta Airlines actually knew that they had an issue with customers who were putting their pets on board because when they would get to the place of reuniting with their pets, it was kind of this dark storage room. The pet was usually not so happy. The person there was kind of like acting like it was a shipment, like here's your clipboard and you sign it. And they realized that customers were telling them, like, this is not okay. Any pet owner here, any pet lover, we know that these little creatures are part of our family and we care about them deeply. And so we want them to be treated a certain way. And so what they did was they literally created, what would this look like if it was done well? And they did a little photo shoot and they had the Delta employee and they had the pet and the carrier. And then they also had a family there. The room was bright. Everybody was smiling. The dog was coming out of the crate to greet the family in a, in the best possible way. And they said, this is what we're going for. And a few years later, they took a real picture and it almost lined up exactly. And that's because they worked towards that innovation. So we can get creative here. We can use pictures, images, vision boards, whatever you want to call them, as well as you could just write out the story. What would this look like for our customers if we innovated in this way? What would it really, how do we know that we delivered on that? And that's why storyboarding can be so powerful with that as well. So there are all sorts of different ways, and it's kind of figuring out what works for you, what would move mountains in your organization. Sometimes we need lots of data. Sometimes we just need to paint the picture and say, this is where we want to go to really get people on board.
Well, I'm in full support of any innovation that includes a room full of dogs.
Exactly. Puppies for everybody.
Yeah. That's great. I think that's going to do it for our questions this week. I want to thank
Excellent.
everybody for being here, for adding your questions, your comments, your ideas, your attention. It's so great to be able to come together and have these sessions. And the community is what makes it more than just Jeannie and I speaking into the void. So we
Which
really
is
appreciate
important.
everything that you
We
bring to it.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yes. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, David, as always, for all of your support and wisdom. And,
Mhm.
as we move forward, I encourage you to really think big about this. Think about what you can do on behalf of your customers, and then really break it down into what's doable and how can we actually push something forward to innovate in the right way. Because as you know, the mission of my organization is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by being here with us, by learning, by sharing, you all have such incredible insights and wisdom, and you're so generous here. And I just so appreciate that. So you're helping us live our mission. And I hope that we are helping empower you to deliver fewer ruined days for your customers too. There are many ways to reach out to us. We always love hearing from you. I'm not sure exactly of the next date here that we will have one of these, but you can always find us with the blog as well as our newsletter. And if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, I encourage you to do that because we always announce these sessions there as well. Please reach out with your questions. Let us know what content you want to see. That drives a lot of what we do. So, how can we help and support you? So, you can find me on Twitter, you can reach out on LinkedIn, all of these different resources. But until next time, please keep doing what you're doing. You are fighting the good fight, you are delivering for your customers. And not only do they appreciate it, but we appreciate it too. Thanks for being here, everybody. See you next time.